welcome back. Your dreams were your ticket out. Welcome back to that same old place that you laughed about. Well, the names have all changed since you hung around, but those dreams have remained and they've turned around. Who'd have thought they'd lead ya? Who'd have thought they'd lead ya? Back here where we need ya. Back here where we need ya. Yeah, we tease him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back.
What's up, guys? Sorry if it sounds like it's in a wind tunnel. Tried to figure it out. Couldn't. Don't really care. Gave up on it. Anyways, got bored. Decided, hey, you guys deserve a podcast. You deserve something to listen to for like 20, 30 minutes. So hopefully it doesn't take that long. I'll try to be short, sweet, and to the point. But I did a lot of research on this, so I kind of want to take my time to explain it. Anyways, I decided to run my numbers on the entire league using the OSA ratings, of course. And from it, I've decided to do a preseason prediction post or podcast. And basically, I will just go from 30 to 1, telling you who I like or who I think is going to finish where. Their top 3 players to look at, minus relievers, because it seemed like everybody's best players were relievers. And then finally, I'll even tell you who I think is going to make the playoffs and who's going to win it all. I'll try my best to update the YouTube video with the standings as I go, as I did like 30 pitchers, but if it gets too time consuming, I might just do per 5. Just bear with me and listen if need be. If not, enjoy the picture I made for you, I suppose, with all the pretty colors I know you guys love so much. So let's begin. In the number 30 spot from the NL Central, I got Cincinnati finishing dead last. I see them inquiring about a lot of youth, so I assume they have the same thoughts I do about their impending season. But players to look for on their team are their outfielders Michael Couch and Melvin Brown, as well as their starting pitcher Dallas Alexander, but it's going to be a rough year. In the 29th spot, just going to crack open a drink, so I have something to drink during this. In the 29th spot, we have Montreal out in the AL worst. It's pretty top-heavy, but other than that, meh. Players to look out for on Montreal is their 3 pitchers, Billy Miller, Gary Randolph, and David Thomas. But much like Cincinnati, I expect it to be a pretty long year for them. In the 28th spot, slowly making his way up the ladder, but not yet ready to compete, is Cookeville, another team from the AL worst. That's the 29th and 28th worst teams in the league so far in that division. Cookeville has 2 pitchers as well, in Ryan Wolf and Joshua Brooks, as well as an outfielder in James Powers that currently are players to watch out for. In the 27th spot, we go to the NL West, where San Diego resides. San Diego has a trio of pitchers that my ratings enjoyed, in Sherwood, Dillard, Mauro Paz, and Anthony Jones, but nothing else really left, or nothing much else to be desired. In the 26th spot, we move up to the AL East, where Atlanta takes that spot. They re-signed Joseph Sexton, I believe. I checked, but then my mind would just get all confused and stuff. I believe they re-signed him recently, and he's about the number 1 guy they have to look at. But other than him, you could check out Tom Hensley and Nick Lester, 2 pitchers that could put up sub-5 ERAs for Atlanta this year in the pretty tough AL East. In the 25th spot, 6 from the bottom, is Chicago, out in the NL Central. Just preface by saying the NL Central is terrible, absolutely dreadful. Worse than the AL West, but whatever, what can you do? Chicago has starting pitchers Roberto Hernandez, Ricardo Peralta, and Jake Dupree to look at. I don't know about their hitting. It must have been pretty bad for them to be so low. Moving into the 24th spot, we have another Canadian team with Edmonton from the NL East. Edmonton's the first team from the NL East to appear on this list. They have 2 pitchers in Gabriel Castillas and Robert Anderson, who should be good, and an outfielder in Roberto Quinones. I'm going to guess that's how you say it. God, I probably butchered that, but he looks to be alright. Remember, I had to pick 3 guys for every team to be nice, so I mean, he could suck, but whatever. In the 23rd spot is the second team from the NL East in Winterfell. Winterfell had some years of being pretty solid, but now it looks like they're near the bottom of the league, especially when it comes to their actual players based on OSA rating. Prove me wrong, because I had them down there before when I did this on paper a couple of years back, and they ended up making the playoffs. So I mean, it is what it is. But players to look out for on their team is third baseman Carlos Ramos and 2 pitchers in Vern Gibson and Rick Dudley. Moving on to the 22nd ranked spot, we have another team in the NL Central. That's 3 teams now, and their division finishes up pretty soon. Spoiler alert. In the number 22 spot, we have San Francisco. The Bay Area team has 3 bats, which is rare on this list, but absolutely no pitching. But if you look out for their right fielder, Luis Perez, third baseman Lawrence Hayes, and first baseman Lee Robinson, they might have some high jersey sales this year, because that's about all the team has. In the number 21 spot from the AL East, and back-to-back AL East champs, who now will be near the bottom of the league, and that's the New England Spitters. New England did as some have put it, masterful job of selling off some high contract players this offseason, and in doing so look to be rebuilding, but also have a pretty smart GM, so who knows, he might just be getting rid of some salary to bring up some guys. That said, the numbers like 2 first basemen, so that's never good, in John Becker and Kel Sampson, assuming first base DH combo, and also third baseman Jason Riley. After I gave a speech about starting pitchers being on here so much, 2 teams back-to-back with none. In the number 20 spot, the 4th team in the NL Central, Alabama. It's kind of stressful when your number 1 player is Luis Flores, who we all know is a reliever to be, but so long as he does well and gets over 1 WAR or over positive WAR, for that matter, as a pitcher, not really much you can say. The other 2 rounding out his top 3 are Gonzalo Villa and Juan Pena, both starting pitchers respectively. In the number 19 spot, taking over for Steel City in the AL West, is AJ's Port Orange Hawks. They're led by old man Eduardo Munoz, who just continues to rake, as well as starting pitchers Roberto Santos and Adam Weiss. They should have a so-so year in that division, but don't expect the playoffs anytime soon, as AJ's taken over the team, and I think he's a little overrated, but that's for another video. In the number 18 spot, but probably end up number 30 because he'll sell all his prospects mid-season before they turn 24, is Nashville. Nashville has some solid players regardless of what they do with all their youth eventually. But first baseman John Bradford, starting pitcher Ruben Perez, and second baseman Manuel Torres are a fine 3 to start off with, and probably will end up on other teams by the end of the year. In the number 17 spot, oh, by the way, Nashville is the first team from the AL Central. The AL Central is a pretty solid division, I'll give them that. In the number 17 spot, the number 1 team in the NL Central, Seattle. It's rough, but Seattle's a solid team. So, I mean, they usually pour it on at the end of the year, do well in the playoffs, and come up short. But, sorry, something bugged me here. They got some solid pitching. They traded for Landy Johnston from Miami. They got Will Nixon, and they got outfielder Ramiro Alomar. They look to be good. And in that division, you don't really have to have like an A-plus team to make the playoffs. And once you make the playoffs, it's a crapshoot anyways. So good luck to them. In the number 16 spot, another team from the NL. This time the NL West. It's Las Vegas. Second team in the NL West. That's actually the strongest division in all of the NDLB. Las Vegas, they have 2 pitchers in Randy Reyes and Augusto Perez who are pretty solid. But their number 1 player to look at is Nick Starr, left fielder, solid hitter. And that's the first half of the prediction. Pretty solid so far. A lot of teams there that I guess people would expect to be there. Maybe a couple teams like New England and stuff that you maybe thought would have been higher, but they're not. And that's how it's going to be. Moving on to number 15. Second team from the AL Central, and it is Shelltown. Shelltown, Louisiana will be upset this year to find out that their 2-year run was for naught, as Manny Leiva, the first baseman, Phil Connor, the pitcher, and Alfredo Gutierrez, another pitcher, lead them to a mediocre season, probably hover around 500, but inevitably not make the playoffs. In the number 14 spot, the number 3 team in the AL East, Youngstown. Youngstown's a team that's forever forgotten about when talked about in the AL East and forever fighting. And this year they should put up a decent battle, but when 2 of your top 3 players are first basemen, it usually doesn't end well. And with Dan Page and Aaron Kimball being named circled on the hitting side and David Miller, a pitcher, that's circled, it'll be a solid year. Got them as a yellowish team. See them around 500 with a lot of teams, but at the end of the year, that'll be about it. In the number 13 spot, we move across to the NL East, where New Jersey is. New Jersey has 3 pitchers that you have to look out for, and Jose Ortiz, Mason Eisenhower, and Francisco Rivera, but not much in hitting, and that's a tough division, and I think they're going to just miss the playoffs. In the number 12 spot, and moving up the charts finally after years of mediocrity and one title a long time ago, you guessed it, from the AL Central, Omaha. Omaha is led by, of course, their star catcher Joe Hudson and their star outfielder Anastasio Garcia, which, if you see what system he came from, you'd understand why he's a star. But the real attraction there is the Canadian Brian Yang, who plays shortstop. Expect him to take another step this year, even if Omaha tries their best not to get the most out of him and has him on a mediocre squad that actually affects him long term and lowers his WAR. And it's probably to do with the fact that he's Canadian and Omaha just doesn't want to see a Canadian do well. I could just see that in George. But if not, Yang, the sky's the limit with him. Moving on to number 11. Speaking of Canadians, geez, there's a lot of Canadian teams in this league now. 1, 2, 3. Oh, cool. And the third one is in the number 11 spot, Moose Jaw. They're still hanging on to Ben Menz, who's arguably their best player, as well as Juan Rosales, their third baseman, and Eric Wilson's a starting pitcher who should help lead Moose Jaw to second place in the AL Central. I think, let me check. Yeah, they will make the playoffs, I think. Just barely, but they'll make it, and it'll be a tough one. In the number 10 spot, another team from the AL Central. See, the AL Central is that division where there's no top-heavy team, but every team in there is pretty solid with the exception of Nashville. So in the 10th spot is Philadelphia. And Philadelphia is one of those teams with 3 pitchers everyone needs to look out for, and Anastasio Rodriguez, nice name, Jeremy Watson, and Jack Howard. Moving on, probably the surprise team at this spot, but had a pretty active offseason, number 9, Houston. It's time for Rand Dog to get back to his old ways. I remember him being a pretty solid coach at the beginning. His wife probably didn't allow him to get into the game as much recently as before, and because of it, he suffered from it, but looks like he's back. And with that Angelo Caballero trade and picking up Kurt Warner and having Julio Valdez, another starting pitcher, Houston looks to make an impact this year and should probably go pretty far. And the number 8 spot is the number 2 team in the NL East, Washington. That's right. If you're paying attention to the division and you see who's going to be left at number 1, I actually don't think Washington's going to win the division this year. As good as he's been, I think this is a year for someone else. Although Washington made a couple trades, they still got Mike Grimes and starting pitcher Tony Sanchez to worry about, as well as first baseman Sam Jenkins. But I feel like in previous years they had much deadlier teams. In the lucky number 7 spot is Boston out of the AL East. Boston has shortstop Brian Klein, starting pitcher Eric Long, and right fielder Francisco Lugo to watch out for, as well as a lot of prospects just waiting to break out. I think it's going to be a battle between them and the number 1 team in the division. Who is going to be next? At number 6, Miami. I think Miami and Boston are going to have themselves a dogfight of a year. Obviously, Miami is led by recent signing third baseman Jordan Blackshaw, young stud pitcher Cisco Ramirez, and best player in the league, arguably best player ever when all said and done, in outfielder Fernando Cuevas, who everyone likes hearing me talk about, and I'm going to talk about a little bit more, maybe even do a whole podcast on why he's the greatest. But for now, let's get into the top 5. Sitting in the number 5 spot, finally getting his way back up there, expected him to be up there for a while, is Los Angeles. Number 2 team in the NL West, though. Los Angeles has Bill Quinn, who they got starting pitcher. They picked up William Seals in a trade, as well as outfielder Morgan Evans, as well as a bunch of other talent that I just think will be enough to carry them to the playoffs for sure in a battle with the number 1 team in the NL West. But moving on, number 4 team coming out of the AL West, Rhode Island. Rhode Island's led by the unstoppable Jorge Marino, as well as 2 pitchers in John Davis and Jose Rodriguez. Moving to the number 3 spot, out of the NL East, yeah, that's right, Bowie. That team no one really knows about. I think Bowie's going to have himself a great year. They got a 3-headed pitching staff in Patrick Jackson, Po-Sin Zhang, and Ron O'Denier. Jeez, those were hard to say. That I think is going to lead them. I think they're one of the blue teams with Rhode Island, and the final 2 teams as just tiers above everyone else, especially the 100-win teams. I think these 4 teams can do it, and I can see Bowie having a huge year. The number 3 team and the number 2 team and the number 1 team in the NL, Orange County. Surprise, surprise, everyone expects them to be up there, as they're forever fleecing people in trades and acting like they don't know what they're doing. Dub has his team ready this year, and they're led by Ryan Henley, second baseman, as well as Lane Sykes, the starting pitcher, and Javier Reyes, the starting pitcher. But of course, the number 1 team in the league, and in a darker blue to just emphasize how much better they are, the Richmond Greeks, led by the pitching duo of Jeremy Maguire and Juan Lugo. A lot assume this will be a 1-year attack because Maguire's age and destined to eventually drop off. But with the talent around Richmond, who knows if that's actually going to be the case. And they're led by their third baseman, Warner Woods, as well as other players in the outfield. I'm sure you guys have heard of all the other guys as well. So, if you look on the screen right now, you'll see the entire makeup of the league as I have it based on standings. But to recap, I think the AL East will go to Miami, AL Central will go to Philadelphia, and the AL West will go to Richmond, with Rhode Island, Boston, and Moose Jaw getting the wild cards. In the NL, I think Bowie will win the East, Seattle will win the Central, with Orange County getting the West, and Los Angeles, Washington, Houston will get the wild cards. So if you look on the screen, the playoffs would have Boston against Rhode Island. I think Rhode Island would move on. Moose Jaw against Philly. I think Philly would move on. And then Rhode Island would take on Richmond. Richmond would move on. Miami would take on Philly. Miami would move on, leaving up Miami, Richmond, ALCS, where Richmond would probably move on. On the other side, Washington, Los Angeles with a Los Angeles victory. Houston, Seattle with a Houston victory. Los Angeles against Orange County moving on. Houston against Bowie with Bowie moving on. Bowie, Orange County going back and forth. I think it'll go 7 with Orange County eventually winning. Setting up the OCD Richmond final, where for 2 years in a row, Richmond will raise the title as champs. That concludes this preseason prediction. I tried to keep it as quick as possible, and hopefully enjoyed it. Have a good rest of your day.